So I thought I would respond to this comment in video format because there's a lot to answer for this question, and basically they were responding to a comment on another post where a woman is telling a story about how a classroom she was in high school was always like really cold for her at 68 degrees, and the teacher said, well, this temperature has been proven to be the best for learning situations. But the issue with temperature is now they're coming out and saying that women, we are more comfortable at when like the room is at a higher temperature than men, which would make sense because women have only really been included in empirical studies in like the past 20 years. And so to put that in context of like longitudinal studies, that basically just means studies that are done over a long period of time, have really only started to be published now. And then I commented on the post and I said there's some research and evidence coming out that neurodivergent people, we also process temperature differently. And so we're all on the same page. Neurodivergent includes and I'm reading this off of the clevelandclinic.org website: autism spectrum disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, DiGeorge syndrome, Down syndrome, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, dyslexia, dyspraxia, intellectual disabilities, bipolar disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, Prader-Willi syndrome, sensory processing disorders, social anxiety, Tourette syndrome, and Williams syndrome. And so from the research I've looked at, the overall consensus is that yes, neurodivergent people, we do process temperature differently, but it's mostly in people with autism spectrum disorder. So this process of synaptic pruning is something that mostly happens in childhood and adolescence, but it removes weak or redundant connections or synapses between neurons in the brain, which ends up, every part of your brain connecting then becomes significant. And there's some research now showing the correlation between synaptic pruning and having sensory difficulties, sensory processing issues, difficulties with social interaction, being able to read body language, and more issues with communication. But then the other side of the coin is that it can enhance abilities around pattern recognition, attention to detail, and memory. And so my conclusion off of that would be it would make more sense that we're processing heat differently and cold, the absence of heat in our body, because we're taking in more stimuli, which means our nervous system is going to react differently. And this article also, I should add, was written by a doctor, a clinical psychologist who specifically works with neurodivergent people, so that's why I trust it more. And homeostasis is the body's ability to maintain a consistent internal environment. It is well known that adults' core body temperature at rest is from 97 to 99 degrees Fahrenheit. Because our bodies need to be in that 3-degree range in order to carry out the functions needed to survive, it also affects our water and moisture levels, carbon dioxide and oxygen levels, blood sugar, blood pressure, mineral and nutrient levels, hormone levels, circadian rhythm, and more. And like the body's senses of touch, taste, smell, there's something called interoception system senses, and this can include hunger, thirst, temperature, discomfort, pain, whether or not you need to use the bathroom, breathing rate, sleepfulness, wakefulness, and even emotional states like stress, fear, and sadness. And so people with ADHD and autism are more likely to have interoception difficulties, which can include feeling temperature, both surface and internal. We're more likely to be susceptible to hypothermia, and we're more likely to burn ourselves. And I can vouch for not feeling like you've been burned, because I have a scar on my hand from putting a pan inside the oven and accidentally hitting my hand like on the rack, and the burn was worse than it could have been because it took like a second longer for me to process the pain of burning my hand. Also, interoception issues can affect understanding whether or not we are hungry, knowing when we're thirsty, knowing when to breathe and at what rate to breathe, regulating blood pressure based on physical activity, which is interesting because I've had like low blood pressure my whole life, and I've gotten like multiple blood tests done, so like I know it's not, or I haven't found an underlying issue for it, but like every time I get my blood pressure done, a doctor's like, is it normal for you to have low blood pressure? I'm like, yeah. To continue, knowing when we're tired and when to go to sleep, feeling whether or not we are feeling internal pain and discomfort, and knowing when to use the bathroom. So if you're like, okay, well, what do I do with all of this information? This is like probably the best therapy workbook I've ever worked through. It's one of the only ones where I've actually done all of it, and in here I'm pretty sure that they talk about, yeah, in here. And then on top of that though, it gives solutions of how to manage it, because you know there's so much out there on like, okay, these are the things that neurodivergent people struggle with, but then there's not many solutions.